When we are on,
Okay,
when we go there.
I was
Yes,
just
we are
asked to say something, so then the mic would go on. So I say something and the mic goes on. Successful cooperation, research, development and innovation. This is one of the finest sessions of these 2 days. Very warm welcome to this session on policy and science cooperation in Baltic Sea cooperation. My name is Maxi Nachtigall. I'm representing the Council of the Baltic Sea States. I'm advisor for sustainable development. And I have a very nice colleague at my side here who will introduce themselves
Good
shortly.
afternoon. My name is Andris Andrušaitis. I'm manager of the Baltic Sea Research and Innovation Program, which is BONUS. So our organizations are holding together this parallel working stream, or as we call it, the workshop, actually. And the title is Successful Cooperation, Research, Development and Innovation. Well, my first reflection is that this is not something desirable, actually, but this is something which we simply cannot afford to avoid. The cooperation between the people involved in research and development and innovation, it's actually the only cure how we can go forward and how we were all observing the discussion in the previous part, and people were talking lots about how to, is it something, are these two parts of the same thing, development and sustainability, or are there any tools how we merge these things together? And actually, I think the answer is this one. We have to put together research, development, and innovation. And this is one of the speakers in the last session mentioned this triple helix, which is actually, she didn't disclose what it is, but this is basically the cooperation between the public sector, the private sector, and the education and research.
That's correct, but I guess we have quite a lot of challenges in front of us when it comes to
Sure.
a very well working and functioning cooperation between science and policy.
Right, and I think you have one story to tell us about.
Well,
this.
yeah, I was thinking about how this, if we always were facing the same problems when it comes to science and policy, or if it's just like our problem. But then I was recently reading a story about that a guy who was actually working in the English Navy in the 17th century. And his name was Captain Lancaster. And Captain Lancaster was actually responsible for the whole English Navy. And at some point, they discovered that scurvy. That is when you went to the sea with the English Navy and you were on a boat for too long and you came back without teeth. And in the worst case, you came back without teeth and dead. So that's not good because you have a lot of losses then in the English Navy. And the English Navy said, we might be doing something about this. And then they called a researcher. And the researcher found out, and that was that Lancaster guy, the researcher found out that when you provide these people with lemon, they might actually lose less teeth. And then the English Navy officers, they discussed this. Unfortunately, they discussed this issue for 150 years. Right. Although Lancaster had done everything to prove that his research was right. So for 150 years, these guys were discussing what to do about this research result until they decided, let's put in another researcher. And another researcher, James Lind, he found out that it's even better when you put in lemon and oranges because that can eventually cure scurvy, even when they're coming back from the sea. But that couldn't really, that was not really a way in to still approve these research results. So the English Navy kept discussing about this, what to do now with these science results for the next 70 years. And turns out when they implemented finally a policy saying that all the marine and seamen having to be getting lemon, then the other ones that were very closely cooperating with the Navy merchants, they took another 48 years to implement the same idea. So the question is, which part of the policy science gap they haven't understood, and if we're facing the same thing and the same experience or the same challenges when it comes to saving the Baltic Sea, what would that mean?
Right, right. And Maxi, by the way, do you know, you told this nice story about, and actually I think while the politicians and scientists were discussing, the sailors were using rum punch, which is actually containing the lime's juice. But you know, in the German Navy and Russian Navy and Swedish Navy and Latvian Navy, do you know what was saving the teeth and the very lives of sailors in those times?
I don't want to say herring, so you better tell me.
No, it's sauerkraut.
See?
It's cabbage and sauerkraut, which actually contains almost as much C vitamin as limes and oranges and lemons. But I think it's a time to invite our speakers and the panelists of this afternoon.
And so should we do, because they're actually the real experts before we're talking too long to tell you more about how to save the sea and how to do better in science and policy interactions than the English Navy and James Lind. So I would like to welcome on stage as one of the first speakers, Professor Jakob Carstensen. He's with the Department of Bioscience, Applied Marine Ecology and Modeling of the Aarhus University. And he's currently the project coordinator of the bonus project COCOA. Please have a seat.
Yeah, I'm just looking for my name.
And as a second speaker, Anna Sosnowska. She is a specialist with the Chief Inspectorate Environmental Protection in Poland. And she is actually representing the Polish coordinator of Priority Area Nutri. As a third speaker, Dr. Martinez. She is Senior Fellow at the Ecologic Institute in Berlin, and at the same time she is Adjunct Associated Professor at the Duke University, and also to mention partner of the Soil to Sea project, also bonus project. And the Ministerial Advisor, Marja-Liisa Tapio-Biström from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forest, Finland. Andres, but you have more.
Yeah, I have some more. May I introduce Heléne Ejhed, Assistant Director of Natural Resources and Environmental Effects at IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute, and coordinator of the bonus innovation project OptiTreat on optimization of small wastewater treatment facilities. Also warmly welcome Jenny Hedman from Swedish Environmental Protection Agency. Jenny is a coordinator of the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region priority area of hazardous substances. Then welcome also Åsa Stenmarck, head of the waste group at IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute, and project manager for RECO, which is a Baltic 21 tech project on sustainable waste management in the Baltic Sea region. And finally, the expert, which you already know, which is Karin Nygård Skalman, director at VINNOVA Sweden, coordinator of the Baltic Sea Stars and Stardust projects, and also coordinator of the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region priority area of innovation and SMEs. Well, talking about these combinations and cooperation and the need of cooperation between researchers and policymakers and the industries, those who are actually doing the innovation, we must return actually to the challenges and the situation with the Baltic Sea, most importantly because actually we are here and this is a forum of the Baltic Sea region, and the challenges of the Baltic Sea, I think this is a very good example. We have eutrophication, we have endangered biological diversity, occurrence of invasive alien species, we have hazardous substances, we were exploited biological resources, and these all actually, this is not only the sentiment about the biological diversity or condition of nature or the clean and pristine environment, these are all actually undermining, these issues are undermining and endangering the very important, very basic ecosystem services. And they also, if we look deeper about how to overcome these issues, we sooner or later realize that we need a cooperation between the research and innovation and the practical actions. Otherwise, we are we are in the forest. You know, there are already nowadays, there are some people who are saying we are researching too much, we need to start doing something. And there are some industrialists who are promising millions and billions and promising, which is the most dangerous, promising the thousands of the working places if we just lift little bit our environmental regulations and when we find some holes in the Baltic Sea Action Plan or the EU strategy, EU Water Framework Directive and so on and so forth. But may I have my other slide? I have a little provocation actually here. Yes, this is my slide. We all know that the Baltic Sea is eutrophied. There are a lot of hazardous substances, and there are more problems actually than profits from the Baltic Sea. We also know that there is another. We are here in this lucky part where the climate scientists are promising that we will have more rainfalls actually, which will lead to more nutrients into the sea, right? Within 20 or 50 years, the water scarcity, which is being discussed very seriously already now, will certainly hit pretty strongly the southern European, which are growing fruits and supplying a lot of other Europe and world with food. So we have technical capacities to close the Danish Straits and make it a freshwater lake, and then export this surplus water not to let it drain into the North Sea as it happens nowadays, but sell it to the other parts of Europe. Your quick reactions. Maybe not all, but maybe two of you. What do you think? Jakob Carstensen, what do you think about this?
Well, I think it's interesting, and I think we could have a very long discussion about you could say, what the positive, pros and cons with your idea would be, and I think that's a long scientific discussion. I'm not going to bore you with that one. I think it's more a matter of, you could say, that any sort of solution that you do, everything you do has some side effects. And I think one thing is that you might come up with a solution, but I think also there might be some cost associated with it. And we're not just talking about the cost of building these two dams that you put on there. I think also that we have to, in addition to, you could say the side effects, the ecological side effects that potentially might be, I think it's also a matter of morality. It's a matter of what we do with nature. We have been sort of culturing our landscapes for the last several thousand years. And we are about to more or less do the same with our marine environment. And I think it's a matter of us humans. Do we want to sort of pass on to our next generations a completely cultured marine landscape? So I'm not sure that science can give you that solution. It's more a matter of priorities. So
right.
It's something for the decision makers.
It's a good approach, interesting approach. Any other quick reactions to this? No.
I guess you scared our panelists
it's too scary.
Already.
But if I may just have another comment, because you mentioned that that it's about that scientists should help do solutions. And I think you're absolutely right. You had a comment about that. But I think it's also a matter of doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think this is where scientists often can come into play.
Absolutely.
Because they have probably a good understanding of all the various processes that are taking place in the Baltic Sea.
Right. Right. I was, this was actually the statement with which I wanted to round up this provocation. I was trying, similarly as I provocate you today here, I was trying this trick with several scientists. As a manager of the bonus program, I'm basically meeting the scientists, the professors, the PIs and the coordinators of our projects, the bonus projects, and I tried with this trick with several professors. Some of they say, oh, don't tell about this to many. This is $1 billion idea. And the others jumped back as I was a leper, But one professor actually told me that they have already tried, they modeled this, how this should work, transforming the Baltic Sea into the freshwater lake. And actually the result was pretty nasty. The result was that stratification, the layering of the water in the Baltic Sea, which already is present now, and which is partly a reason why the problems, the deep water hypoxia, which you have, which some of us know very well, that would actually strengthen, and for maybe half a century we will have something like a Black Sea, with a total dead zone in the bottom. So this is a too scary idea, I think, for the coming decades, but who knows? Right, but
Let me get in here, because Jakob already also seemed to know quite a lot of questions, has the right answers, as you already provided one right answer. So let me continue with the Cocoa project. Understood something when we spoke earlier, and what I heard from Andres, it's about filters and cocktails, and in a summary, you were looking at pathways of where nutrients are going in the Baltic Sea when you put it in somewhere and where they end up at. Explain a bit more what it is about and how you maybe look into policy science interface here.
Well, I think there should be a slide coming up. Oh, there we have it. So that's right, and we have put into, you could say, the acronym or the title of our project something about cocktail, and of course that's just to make it a bit catchy. But there is something about this cocktail, because we can call it, let me see, I got this, there we go. There we are. This is the cocktail. Please roll back. Okay, so we have the cocktail, but we could also call it an alphabet soup. So essentially we're talking about some, you could say, some of the central elements, some of the most common elements that we have on Earth, elements that are in all animals and plants. And we're talking about nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, and silicium. And the coastal zone actually acts as a filter. And you can imagine a lot of this is actually waste that humans are producing. And the coastal zone is actually providing a service to us humans by removing some of those, you could say, pollutants. You can consider them pollutants on the way out to, for instance, the open Baltic Sea. Now, the problem with this filter is the same as with the coffee filter. That is, if you overload the filter, you get an overflow. And suddenly, the filter does not work anymore the way it's supposed to do. And you have a lot more of these polluting substances ending up out in the Baltic Sea. And this is why it's important to understand how this filter works. Now, the idea behind COCO is not try to see if we can recreate something like right after the glaciation period, a completely pristine landscape. I think the point that many scientists take on right now is that we have to think about the services that coastal ecosystems provide and try to optimize them to the use of humans. And that means that actually we should make sure that we should identify how many nutrients and organic material can coastal zones actually absorb before you actually exceed that threshold or that critical limit where suddenly the system collapses and you don't have the filtering effect anymore. It's a bit like, you could say, having money in the bank. You know, we have a lot of money in the bank, but we have to live with the interest rate. We shouldn't take the capital out from our coastal ecosystems. They still have to provide a lot of services to us. And yeah, this is just to show that we have a lot of different components in the system, and they all carry out very different processes. And I just want to have one final slide, and just showing how effective coastal ecosystems actually can be. This is from the Stockholm archipelago, showing that oxygen concentrations have improved after they actually removed a lot of the point sources, that is from treatment plants coming into the Stockholm archipelago. And phosphorus concentration also went down. But one of the things, if you can move on to the next one, one of the things that we might notice is that once we have removed the nutrients, we can see with these black dots, there's a good relationship between phosphorus concentrations and oxygen. But in 2004, 5, something like that, we had this animal coming in, and that was very effective because after this polychaete called Martinez came into the system, suddenly we have a lot less phosphorus coming out because that animal has the capacity to actually mobilize the sediments or bioengineer the sediments so that they can take up a lot more phosphorus. And actually the effect of this is worth the same a treatment plant. So it's actually quite effective. So we know that the value of ecosystems is quite important.
Well, thank you very much. That was the science input. But Andres, you already have the policy question.
Yeah. We have some speakers which represent the policy part, and that was very scientific. I know that Jakob, you are a good popularizer of the science, but still, it was a bit scientific, which you told. And I have a question to our other panelists today, which is Anna Sosnowska. And I know, Anna, that you are the coordinator of the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region parallel action, which is about nutrients. So this is basically, we are in the same realm which we started with, which of course, as many of us know, which is the biggest problem and the biggest issue for the Baltic Sea. But I also know, Anna, that you have been involved in quite a lot of attempts to facilitate the coordination and communication and exchange between the scientists from one part and then the policymakers or stakeholders or users of that scientific knowledge of the other part. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, thank you. First of all, as priority area coordinator, we feel like a bridge between policy and science, because policy produce the goals which they want to achieve, and you have this action plan of the strategy, and each area have the actions and goals which they want to achieve. And now we have to think how we need to achieve these goals. And we want to do it by flagship projects. And these flagship projects have to be work which should be done for achieving this goal. And we need science there. So we, as priority area coordinators, contact to different scientific institutions, universities, NGOs, and others, and inform them about the strategy and our priority area, the problems which we would like to solve, and the possibilities for them to have to get involved in the cooperation. So we inform them how to prepare the flagship projects and how to get funding for that. We help them with looking for partners for the project, and we have this different stakeholders list. So we inform them about what's going on in the area, and in getting what we get back from them, it's when we get a project proposal which fits to our goals, and after when we have when the project is done and we have outcome, like for example from the project assessment of regional nutrient pollution load and identification of priority projects to reduce nutrient inputs from Belarus to the Baltic Sea, which was presented yesterday. There were two partners from scientific institutes, and then their goal was to identify priority investments for the upgrading of municipal infrastructures, especially wastewater treatment in the Belarus. And when they had this outcome, they provided to the ministries in the Belarus area. And now we are waiting for the government to make steps forward with that. So this is this chain, how it works, that we ask scientists for help, and then we give the effects to the policymakers. And we hope that we will achieve something by this.
Anna, you mentioned also, we discussed before this issue with you, and you also mentioned that actually you as a coordinators of the priority area, you also see your role as facilitating these consortia, building up these consortia of scientists and helping them with finding the partners and then developing a good proposal and then helping them to
exactly.
Place that proposal
exactly.
into a proper scheme for getting the funds.
I don't, because I work in the Chief Inspectorate of Environmental Protection, but we are the coordinator on behalf of our minister. And I'm not sure if you know what the word minister means from Latin. It means servant or helper.
Right.
So this is our role to help to solve the problems.
Very nice.
Yeah, we should.
Indeed.
We are doing it for society.
Indeed. Let's remember what's the true meaning of the minister of the term of minister. But let's go forward. We have lots of interesting things to discuss.
Thank you. We go forward with the next researcher, and you might have already seen the nice twist in the session. I'm the policy person who's supposed to introduce all the research speakers, so I hope for the next I'm not messing up the whole wording here. We shortly spoke about the Soils to Sea project, and Martinez is a partner in this project. And you told me that you're looking at the regional approach on how nutrients go through soils and ending eventually up in waters. But in your project, as far as I understood, you're actually combining inside of that project the natural science aspects with anthropological/social aspects. And that seems to be quite interesting, to have science policy and natural science social aspects in one project already while you're doing the project. So tell us more about that.
That's correct, and I want to stand up for that, Maxi. Sorry, yes. You said you should sit, but I want to stand saying that. That's correct. Good afternoon, everybody. Indeed, the project is called Soils to Sea, and as we all know, eutrophication is regarded as one of the most serious environmental risks. That's absolutely clear. And we all know that a multitude of protective policies and measures have been undertaken since the 1970s. It's all clear, and we all know we haven't solved the problem yet. And we know approximately 50% of the eutrophication is caused by nutrition runoff from traditional farming. So far, so good. And this brings us right to the mission of Soils to Sea. This is a 4-year project. We have 8 partnering institutions from various riparian states of the Baltic Sea with various cultures and backgrounds. And the key idea of Soils to Sea is, and the first slide, please, and you can see a map here. It's from a previous project, but never mind. And that shows the nitrate reduction percentage with a grid resolution. And this map shows that for some areas, almost 100% of the nitrates leaching from the root zone is reduced through the water that transports it before it reaches the streams, while for other areas, as you see in the slides, it's very small, the percentage which is reduced. So that means we have spatially a heterogeneity around the soils on which we live and which we farm on. It's not one solution for every soil. So, and that's what we want to understand and exploit in Soils to Sea. And for what we aim is to propose spatially differentiated regulations. And if you go to the next slide, please, what you see here is, and you also can find a picture in the latest bulletin of bonus, what you here see is that some of the soils, the nutrients in the soils are removed naturally, so to speak, and others not. And this has to do with different patterns of absorption of the geomorphological conditions of the soil. And you see here that upper soil layers are oxic. There is a fine line, you see that, and it says oxic. And that means that nitrate behaves as a conservative tracer. There is no reaction and no retention. While in deeper soils, the nitrate is removed. And this is what we have to understand. The soils are different. And the interface between these 2 layers is called the redox interface. You also see that on the slide. And in clay sediment deposits, these are the areas with many Scandinavian countries we have because of the glaciers and the ices. In these areas, the nutrients are better removed than in others. And that's what we have to understand. We have key or test areas in the Soils to Sea project in Denmark, in Sweden, in Poland, and Russia. And obviously, they are all different. And here we want to test with our scientific approaches from the natural science, but also from the social science. And that's I'm going to explain right now. We want to test why is it different and what can we do to help measure on the output side and the input side, instead just using one solution for everything. However, this is only the geomorphological situation. But what about the people living on that soils? They are all different too. We hear about culture, we hear about regions. And as we see, the need for reduction, that's the next slide, please, of fertilizers differs from area to area, and it depends on the geomorphological conditions of the soil. But what about the people living on that soil, people in Sweden and Denmark and Poland and Russia, which are the test sites for our project? As far as the geomorphological conditions differ, so do the perceptions, the values, the beliefs, thoughts about nature and the environment, and hence the needs for uptake and acceptance of regulations. For instance, in countries with high-intensity farming, the regulation of agricultural production is based on monitoring and control of inputs, such as crop types and amounts of fertilizers. This system puts a heavy burden, administrative burden, on farmers without any flexibility towards allowing them to find local solutions based on local knowledge and their local possibilities. And that's what we want to explore from the human science, the social science perspective. And please allow me to say, we will do an ethnographic research in which we will investigate the particularities of history, political and legal traditions, socio-economic patterns, structure of governance, concepts of justice in these test sites. We will talk to farmers, to regional authorities, to people from ministries, to local residents. And what we really want to understand is the cultural knowledge of those people, in particular, the context in which they are willing to act, their beliefs and values, and also the motivation and acceptance of an uptake. And this both things together, the soils underneath us with their different conditions on the input and output side, and the people on the soils with their different motivations and knowledge and traditions and cultures. That's what we're investigating, and for this we want to put forward regional, local, spatial policy frames, measures and tools.
Thank you very much, Grit. Actually, what you told us is I'm as a program manager, once again, I cannot live without this hat of the program manager of the bonus program. I'm very happy. I was very happy to hear this because when we examined actually where is the bottleneck when we were designing the strategic research agenda for the whole program, we originally wrote it in some years ago, and then we were updating it in the last year actually, and we saw that the real bottleneck is actually not so much in the natural science part. Natural science part is of course, there are problems and questions, but this is more or less understood in big pieces. But in the societal part, there are big gaps, big lacunes of knowledge which actually need to be filled. So I'm very happy that Soils to Sea project involves this part, which is here, which you just presented to us, which discusses about the socio-cultural construction of the eutrophication. Wonderful title. But? No, I want to go on. So, but yeah, if you have very short reflection.
Very short. I wouldn't say there's a lack of knowledge. Knowledge is all there. Maybe there was a lack of exploring that.
Oh, that's another
and
issue.
Understanding that. It's all there.
That's
and people
another
are
big
waiting
issue.
for being asked and
Absolutely.
told their
Yeah,
stories.
we maybe come to this conclusion, but we also actually we discover in our studies in the Baltic that actually the how to say the elemental knowledge is there. What is lacking is translators and propagators of knowledge and summarizers and synthesizers of knowledge. This is where actually we have the gaps. But we have another very experienced panelist today with us, and Marja-Liisa Tapio-Biström. You've been working, I understand, lot of years in the Ministry of Agriculture. You are advisor of the Finnish Ministry of Agriculture. And I have a question with a little bit a tricky background. You know, we heard about eutrophication, and Grit told us that this is, in a bulk, it's coming from the agriculture, and in the same time we know that the agriculture is very heavily subsidized in the Baltic, not only in the Baltic Sea region, but also in the whole European Union. So to one hand, I'm a layman in how it all works, but I understand that giving out some subsidies also gives you a mechanism, an instrument to regulate something, how it works, and how living in a world of subsidized agriculture is there anything we can do about somehow helping to cope with the eutrophication, overfeeding of our Baltic Sea?
Thank you for the very challenging question, which I think we are working at every day. It became very clear from the previous presentation that when we talk about agriculture, we are really talking about very complex, place-specific and very knowledge-intensive systems, which are very important to all of us. To move forward and solve the problem you posed, I think that we need to have a vision of sustainable production systems. Where are we heading at? What do we want to achieve? What do we need to change to move towards more sustainable systems? And to me, this is a bit personal. I'm sure that all of you might have a little bit different visions, but to me, sustainable production systems in agriculture means landscapes, not only fields. Land areas producing ecosystem services, of course food, also feed, energy, climate protection, water management, pollination, soil formation, and many other services which are vital to the society and which should be paid for in one form or other. One of the guiding principles should be responsible management of resources. We will be facing globally and locally limits to the resources we have at our disposal. We need equality and fairness among citizens in our own countries, but also between regions in the countries, between countries, different countries in the world. And fundamentally what we want to have is well-being of people and natural and social systems they depend on. So that's the goal, that's where we are aiming at. But when talking about agriculture, we have to remember and understand that it's very different from other production systems. Food is a strategic resource. It's very political. It's not comparable to any other product. National security concerns are important, and they define very much our relationship to food production. Political stability is linked to food availability, and all the governments are extremely conscious about that. Further, natural systems cannot be controlled like the industrial systems. Risk management and adaptation to changing circumstances is a huge challenge. When we are talking about agriculture, we can't forget also the other side, responsible consumption. What we are demanding, that we are producing. Next slide, please. So what we need to move towards more sustainable systems. We need to have holistic management practices where we aim at achieving the different legitimate goals the society has placed on agriculture. This means to me that we have to move to payments for ecosystem services instead of the present system of paying or compensating the costs for farmers for introducing environmental practices. And I hope that in the next programming season we will see a fundamental change in our common agricultural policy towards that goal. We can't forget that the basis of functioning ecosystems is biodiversity. And if we don't have functioning ecosystems, we just will not manage the challenge of producing food for all of us. This means to me that we need new types of cooperation. We have this classical idea of family farms. I think this is going to change, and we need to think how. Cooperation between producers, but also interesting ideas are coming up of cooperation between producers and consumers. And finally, we need risk management. We are going to need new thinking how to manage increasing risks. Because of climate change and also all kinds of economic and political turmoil, we are going to need to think very hard how can we manage the risks. Finally, I think that we need development which is based on iterative learning. As I said, agriculture is very knowledge intensive. And most of the knowledge is silent, based on practices, trial and error. Then we need good science. And finally, we don't need prescriptions, but possible solutions for farmers to adapt to their specific needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, what you just said is leader of horizontal action, sustainable development, which I I am when I'm not on that stage. You said a lot of nice things that just open up my heart, but unfortunately we have to continue. And then we come to yet another issue when we come over nutrients and phosphorus and everything ending up in the sea, then we're ending up with hazardous substances, and that's just another pain.
Right. Well,
but I heard there is a project on its way to maybe solve or ease some of that pain. And I wonder what OptiTreat is all about. And we heard that maybe you can have some animals cleaning the water, but I guess that's not your main approach.
yeah, OptiTreat is about optimizing small wastewater treatment plants that is on-site for private households. And actually, small private household wastewater is one of the major sources of phosphorus, developing into your funnel of cocktails for cocoa to deal with. And they are usually microbiological systems that are actually small microbugs in there active. So they are really already active in these systems.
But can you tell a bit more about OptiTreat? Like, you have these hazardous substances coming in, obviously, and you're going to look at waste management plans, how these waste management plans and new clean tech solution then in these plans can help to ease the problematics of hazardous substances. What is happening in these plans?
Right, in the plants, the microbiology is actually active in reducing these both nutrients and other substances which are in the wastewater, and that is mostly like pharmaceuticals and household chemicals and things like that, which is in the household wastewater. So they are reducing them, and there are several parameters to control in these systems. They're quite similar to the systems that are used today. So you use the retention time using these microbes to be active. You use the oxygen to be able to reduce them by oxygenation, and redox and pH and temperature, which are parameters that you can control. But mostly, one of the problems is also how to regulate these systems. And today, the one focus is to change from misuse of these systems, since it's a private sewage system. It's actually a problem of understanding the problem and owning the problem and act on the problem to change your system to a functioning system. So you need a facility of proper capacity. You actually need a continuous use of this property. You should probably use an electricity supply and not turn it off when you go off for the weekend or so on. So you need an understanding of how these systems actually work. So one part of the project is also regulations and good examples of how to make them work better, which incentives that actually work. So we're going to have discussions between the different countries of Swedish, Polish, and German authorities to start acting more on the incentives. You can change pictures. So the focus in OptiTreat is the substances, actually how to reduce them between incoming water to outgoing water, and which of the parameters that are most important. So we'll look both at the macro pollutants, which are the nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, COD, all of these going into Jakob's funnel out in the sea. But then we also include, of course, then the micropollutants, which are the pharmaceuticals, antibiotics, which is not a second problem, which we're going to look into more of antibiotic resistance bacteria developing. Are they developing more in these systems or not? So we're going to have a look at that. It's actually new technology, and we try to see if the technology could be developed and optimized to reduce this problem in that case. And then we have the antiseptic substances, which could actually reduce the functioning of the systems because of the active on the microbes instead of being reduced. But you should also remember that this is a cocktail. Wastewater is a cocktail and a node of different substances. Pharmaceuticals, for instance, it's a real challenge. They are really different in their chemical characterization. So we have bases, we have cytostatics, we have acids, and we have a very variable amount of water-soluble to lipid-soluble substances, and all of this is going to be taken care of this small system, so it's a really complex environment.
So have the technology and use it smartly.
Yeah.
Heléne, you mentioned already pharmaceuticals and antibiotics and some other substances. And, you know, I grew up with, we were talking about PCBs and dioxins. And then there was, for a brief spell of years, there was this feeling that basically the issue of the hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea is more or less being solved, and the situation is improving. And I have a question to our other panelists. You are the coordinator, Jenny, coordinator of the parallel action of hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea.
Yes.
And there is this whole bunch of new substances which is called new pollutants or new hazardous substances. Could you elaborate on this a little bit? Where we are, what's happening, and what are the most urgent issues at the moment?
Where to start? I can take myself as an example. I use deodorants. I use cosmetics, shampoos, toothpaste, all different kinds of personal care products. Many of them contain chemical substances that has been proven to be very challenging for wastewater treatment, and so they're discharged into the environment. I use clothes and wash them regularly. In many clothes nowadays, it's quite common to use nanoparticles. For different functions, they can be added to increase water resistance, stain resistance, to remove odor, increase the effectiveness of dyes, etc. Not seldom are we as consumers informed by the producers that this effect will only last for a number of washes, and then the effect is lost, together with the nanoparticles that will end up in the sludge, in the wastewater. I use pharmaceuticals occasionally when I need them. I use plastic knives and forks when I eat my takeaway food in plastic containers using additives. I use my computer a lot. I watch TV. I use my cell phone. All of these products containing different types of substances that can cause trouble in the environment when they reach the environment. I am a small, diffuse source of hazardous substances to the environment. And so the challenge is how to stop me from being this source to the environment. I think I'm a challenge to policy because I'm not a chimney to put a filter on. I'm just a normal, regular member of the society. And to solve this problem, I think it's very crucial that we cooperate in this manner that this panel is all about. Policy, science, innovation, and not to forget business sector. We need to integrate and cooperate together to find new solutions, an innovative solution. And I want to refer to what Karin said in the previous panel. Innovative solutions is not only about technical innovations. It's also about social developments and new ways of cooperation. And for example, how to develop new approaches to address consumer behavior, societal education, awareness raising, new business models, for example, to work both downstream and upstream, and with me in the middle as a source of hazardous substances to the environment.
Well, Jenny, thank you so much for your open statement.
Overview.
It sounds we are all in a group of anonymous Baltic Sea polluters. That doesn't sound really nice. But talking about pollution, listening to you, I heard there is a lot of waste as well going down the stream. You're consuming quite a lot. You're producing a lot of waste that eventually will end up somewhere else. And maybe Åsa, you can help us identifying what's happening on land and what are we supposed to do to ensure less waste is ending up in the sea, and how to be better consumers?
I cannot answer all of those questions in
I
the
just tried
time
to sneak
given.
in a nice
I'm
bridge to
sorry.
you.
But as a project manager for the RECO project, it was about improving waste management. So we are now upstream on land and not in the water at all, at least in this project. And we wanted to have a cooperation, as Jenny referred to also, between policymakers and us as researchers or the project. We were both researchers and also other stakeholders dealing with waste management in this project. So RECO was a continuation of a previous project, and we know when we wrote the application that, well, there are two things that we need in this project. We did many things, but I will speak about those two things. The first thing was that we needed a joint strategy for waste management for the whole Baltic Sea region, because we have the EU laws, but we needed to implement it better in the Baltic Sea region. So that was the first joint strategy developed by this project. But we also knew that we needed some sort of cooperation between national decision makers. This means people in the EPAs or the ministries, to come together to discuss in a not so formal way, but in an open-minded way, to discuss the different issues that are emerging in the different countries around the Baltic Sea. So these were two things that we applied for and also did within the project, which ended half a year ago, actually. But the aim of this Baltic Waste Management Council, which we ended up calling this National Decision Makers Forum, it was to have this dialogue between them as decision makers, but also with us as a project. And we found it very helpful that they would help us develop this strategy, because we did develop this strategy. It's available on our website, for example. The strategy contains actions and also contains responsibilities for these decision makers, because it's among the decision makers that the kind of magic happens. That's where we actually make the change. So we fed them with our ideas from the scientific point of view. This is how you should do it. This is how you should improve waste management. This is what we see is needed. And they said, well, thank you very much. We think that this is possible to do. And actually, I know that in a few of the countries, our ideas from the strategies already implemented in the national waste management policies. So I think that this is kind of a success story when early in the project we had the decision makers and policy makers involved in the project's activities and kind of made magic happen, actually.
So a successful project to policy approach that happened on land to save the sea.
Yeah.
But Anders, I guess you have more questions.
Yeah, and this is actually, we are approaching the end to the first wave of questions. And Karin, I have a question to you. You have, I don't know if there are many people around the Baltic Sea who has been involved so much and thinking and invested so much of your thinking into how to overcome this death valley between the invention and the real true innovation. And you are also one of the big promoters of this idea of this, that in innovation is not only technology and technique, but is actually where we need innovative governance, we need innovative management and innovative ways how the things are done. And we are talking nowadays a lot about the blue growth and the green growth, and we are talking about merging with the public and private funds. We are talking about these PPP, public-private partnership, and in reality, how this true, genuine collaboration between the academy on one side and the industry and the policy can be really achieved. You are sometimes using this parable of the triple helix, I've noticed. And could you explain us how it could work in a real sinful life?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. There are many questions, and it's not that easy to answer them quickly because it's such a broad subject. May I stand up? Is that okay? A little bit, but it's
Whatever
like
you wish.
I felt like I have to stand. It's of course you can see the picture there that I have. We start with that one actually. It's one way of sort of promoting, which I said earlier, promoting collaboration is the sort of joint partnership between the researchers and the Innovation Society, which has actually ended up in the bonus innovation call. And I think that's a sort of a unique opportunity to get this kind of really strength from the researchers and combine that with the Innovation Society. We are doing that in the Innovation Agency. I work with VINNOVA a lot, of course, to combine researchers with innovation, because we're trying to make sort of commercialize the research. That's actually what innovation is all about, to get it out into the market. But when you talk about blue growth and when you talk about bioeconomy, I mean, the business there is not that easy by itself. It's like some kind of, we think we can get things for free. I mean, the water should be for free and the food should be good even without it, and all the waste should sort of be a societal human right. Yeah, so this means that we have to be listening to you as well. I think it's so extremely important that, of course, we start this kind of project to show the way. How can things be done? What is possible to do to run pilot projecting? But to run project is not enough. We really have to do something more. Like we talk a lot about public procurement, for example. And how can that be done in these fields? How is it possible to do this? I'm not quite sure how to do it, but I think we have to be a little bit more innovative here. Yeah, one thing we are doing is we have one example in Sweden called Lighthouse. It's actually in Gothenburg. Just show an example how it works. It's yes, and we made this a competence center. And maybe you can just press a little bit so I get down to the bottom there. It's we do have this kind of. If the challenge is to reduce the carbon dioxide, for example, just say that. And it's so complex, we have to go down and we don't really know. So if you look at the text on the bottom, just press one more. There is a huge gap and a huge challenge. We need so much competence in putting these things together, and I think a lot of the project you are running here at Bonus can help this. But it's not enough to run 3-year project. You have to have a solid institutional base. You have to have competence center, put different people in the same place. So that's one of the things we are doing, at least in Sweden, is to sort of promote maybe up to 10 years competence centers in certain fields to make them stronger. And maybe we should promote this kind of cooperation as well in the Baltic Sea region. So yeah, and another part is, of course, just to run project and come up with solutions. But I didn't want to. I still think we have to look into the public procurement side. And I think that can make a difference. But I don't know exactly how. So we have to work with business models.
Right. All right, we will certainly return. If we manage to have economy of a couple of minutes, we will certainly return, because every answer creates new questions. And this is how it is, basically. But we have a surprise.
We have a surprise, because now you have seen how smart people in this region try to smartly cover the issues and challenges we are in front of when trying to save the Baltic Sea on land and what's happening in the water. But then we have a couple of smart people, I'm promised at least, in the audience as well, hidden. And one of them is Erik Bonsdorff, Professor of Marine Biology, Department of Bioscience, Environmental and Marine Biology of Åbo Academy. And I know I was not supposed to say Turku at that point in time. And he will be commenting on or hopefully some of the issues that were raised here. But
it's microphone too.
He's not the only one going to comment on that.
There will be some others, but we'll start with Erik.
Thank you for calling me smart people. I like that. And I wish my family and my students would be here so they would know that officially I'm qualified. And thank you for calling this city by its first real name, Åbo, as well. So as said, I'm a professor of marine ecology, biology, and I care, of course, about the living sea, the life in the sea. And this presentation gave rise to a few reflections. And I'd actually like to put this away so I could fiddle with my papers here, but one of the things which you have made very clear to all of us is the fact that the Baltic Sea, more than anything, is a sea of acronyms. We have mentioned like 30, 40 different acronyms here, and it's actually one of the part of the problem is the number of actors who all say that we will solve the problems. And I think there is need for cooperation. When did kind of people really start doing something about the Baltic Sea? When did science and policy start discussing? I think it was after the 1988 collapse of the ecosystem with lots of blue-green algal blooms and seal death and so on, when prime ministers, fantastic, thank you, all of a sudden agreed that something had to be done. And since then, science and policy has been communicating. And what we should be realizing, I think, is one of the take-home messages is not just what we can do, but also what the sea can do for itself. And I think Jakob had a good point there, that if we help the system along a little bit, it actually has quite a big capacity for recovery, for self-healing. But we should be aware of that the self-healing process usually takes at least as long a time as the degradation process has taken. So a few really brief comments on this. I think we should be also aware, or policymakers they should always listen to us scientists and experts, but we should not turn this into an expert society. It should be expert advice given on a holistic level, I think. We need interdisciplinary advice, not just from natural scientists, chemists, biologists, but also from political sciences and so on. I also think that there's one thing we need to be aware of when we talk about research and science and policy and so on. There's a difference between research on the one hand and science on the other in my world. And science is something which we don't necessarily do to solve today's problems. You can say that there are things we have to know, things we must know, and those are there to solve the problems we know today. And today we know the problems, we know nutrients, we know pollutants, we know this, we know that. And so doing that stuff is simply doing. Then we have the things we need to know. In other words, how do we tackle the problems we know are already coming for tomorrow? Climate change is a very good example. We know the problem, we know what it is, we know the reasons, but we do not know the effects of it. This is where a thing like bonus comes in, that let's do something on a 5-10 year scale and see if we can come up with advice to society. And then from a university professor perspective, there's one more step, and that's the things which are nice to know. In other words, the things we don't really know what we're driving at. We're doing science research on this land-sea interaction interface, and we really don't know if it will serve a purpose, but what we do know is that if we do good science, we will be better prepared to answer the problems that arise in 30 or 40 or 50 years' time. So I think we need all these levels. And sometimes politicians and policymakers find it hard to discuss on those terms, meeting on those agendas, because of course the must-know is a thing a minister can agree on. Yeah, I need to do this if let's bubble the Baltic Sea and cure the oxygen problem. And then we will say it's not that easy. And still we have something like 80,000 square kilometers of dead bottoms, so something has to be done. So that's one of the messages. The other thing is, somebody was mentioning this sustainable and sustainability. I'm a little bit allergic to the term sustainable development. Sustainability is okay, but then society always demands higher salary, more cosmetics, more travel, more this, more that. And so sustainability on one hand and development on the other, I'm not sure that there is an equation that can solve that.
They didn't teach us in the biology faculty that the growth can be sustained.
Exactly.
The exponential growth in particular.
So you're right. So one of the things which I think is of prime importance if we want to get society along with us is some of the things Jakob, and I'm a little bit biased because I'm involved in the same project, but I'm also involved in another bonus project on biodiversity. But the fact that we have this coastal filter, people see the sea from land, so they see an open sea. And the open sea, of course, also impacts the coastal system. So in between, we have this ecological filter, which by default also happens to be the place where the highest biodiversity is, the highest production, and the highest vulnerability to environmental change. So that's where we need to put a lot of effort. And another thing which was not touched upon by any of you, was the fact that we are now looking at the pieces on the jigsaw puzzle, but we don't really care about function. And I think, and this is my ecological myself talking here, is ecologist, scientist talking. We actually need to know much, much, much more about how things function. So when you say that, quite often the people with the money and the technology, they say that let's just fix it because you know the pieces already. We know them, but we don't know how they work. And I would challenge people and say, engineers say that they can solve the problems. I would turn it around and say, engineers, they created the problem, right? By giving us the possibility to pollute.
But Erik, let us hear about the policymakers, what they have to deal with. You are challenged by all these concepts already.
I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. That was excellent. The scientific perspective or research perspective or both is actually, I think it's presented very nicely. But somewhere in this dark hall there are some other surprise invited commentators, and one of them is Mikhail Durkin. Mikhail has been working at the HELCOM, the Baltic Sea Environmental Protection Commission, for a number of years, and Mikhail has been very much involved actually in the policy part of creation and the first years of implementation of the Baltic Sea Action Plan. So Mikhail, well, when your microphone number 1 is ready to go, could you reflect your perspective of what you heard today?
Well, thank you very much, Andres, for introduction. And it's always good to be a secret commentator somewhere in the dark audience, being called for some smart words. But perhaps I will not give as many wise and scientifically relevant words as Erik just did. So we'll try to do something from a policy perspective. First of all, congratulations for a really nice and interesting panel. Because, well, it also highlighted a lot of the issues that HELCOM has been working recently, and, well, for many, many years, for 40 years, actually, already. I was quite happy to see that 5 out of 8 speakers on this stage are in some way connected to HELCOM work. And 3 those remaining actually are very much interested, and that's a shame for myself, not being in contact with them earlier. So that's something to be done, especially with regards to agriculture, especially with regards to hazardous substances, and certainly with regards to innovations, what we are so far being lacking, I guess, in HELCOM framework. We did, of course, a bit of work related to innovations in shipping sector, but maybe not that much in other sectors like agriculture. We are only stepping into that right now. But talking about innovations, I also was quite fascinated with your innovative provocation or provocative innovations in the beginning regarding Lake Baltic. Actually, a couple of reflections regarding Lake Baltic also from my side and from policy side. Well, first of all, as you said, it is technically feasible. We know the example of Soviet Union and transferring of Siberian rivers, or at least the idea of transferring Siberian rivers into Central Asia to irrigate arable land. So that was seriously considered, and I really hope that there won't be such engineering solutions in the Baltic Sea in the future. The second, Lake Baltic may sound to some as an ultimate answer to connect the region, so we can make a ring road around the Baltic, a ring railway road, and easily connect and transport goods. And perhaps for some, it may even sound an answer to increase prosperity in the region, like making a big pond for aquaculture in the Baltic. But certainly it's not an answer to save the sea. So if we will divert the Baltic Sea into a salt marsh, then it will be just a salt marsh, and it will actually show that we failed to save the sea, and we can only export some fresh water to Danube and Adriatic-Ionian macro-regional strategies.
All right.
Finally, yeah, that was an extreme example, of course, of macro-regional exchange of experience between marine regions. But all in all, it brings us to a conclusion that, well, also with the question, what will happen with closing the Baltic into a pond, there is no single answer, a single easy answer. So certainly something is missing. And perhaps something maybe is not very available in the region also for the policymakers. And it brings to a conclusion that perhaps besides connecting the region, besides increasing prosperity, and besides also saving the sea, we are missing one ingredient, which is improving the knowledge or making the knowledge more available, especially to policymakers. And as an example, in fact, I would like to reflect on what Marja-Liisa Biström said about agriculture and what we need to develop, well, sustainable agriculture in the Baltic Sea region. And there are plenty of keywords that she has mentioned, including economy, including incentives, including, well, even thinking about biodiversity as the basis for agriculture production in the region. And also she mentioned sustainable consumption. So these are really nice keywords we all have to remember. And they all reflect what I just said and what reflects the objectives of the EU strategy. Well, increasing prosperity, well, we certainly can increase the prosperity with solving agri-environmental problems in the Baltic Sea region. We certainly can connect the region through exchange of experience and knowledge between the countries in the region, so not literally connecting by transport. And certainly we can save the sea through implementing sustainable agricultural solutions. So, all in all, that brings to a conclusion that besides all those three objectives in the strategy, we may need to think about improving and making available the knowledge for the policymakers as the fourth objective, which will be a cross-cutting between all those three. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mikhail.
you so much. And there is, as I know, one fully fledged policymaker in this room who has joined us today from Estonia, and that will be Alan Gromov as Counselor of the International Cooperation in Estonian at the Estonian Ministry of Environment. And I would like to ask him to comment, and maybe with a view on, you have the full knowledge here on the stage, and you heard already your fellow colleague commentators. Do you have all the knowledge as a policymaker?
I'm a civil servant, and I'm a civil servant in the field of environment from the beginning of 90s. And civil servant is not a policymaker. Civil servant is always advisor and manager of different parts of the game. And what I should say that a lot of what I was going to say has been taken away by Mikhail, because the first irritative introduction of the panel concerning the Baltic Lake remind me automatically about the USSR idea about the turning around the Nordic rivers. And by the nature, civil servant, dedicated civil servant, cannot be a pessimist. Should be an optimist. And if you look at the development of the Baltic Sea region over the last 25 years, nobody mentioned actually that the most important factor for the development of the region was actually enlargement of the European Union. Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and before that, Nordic countries. How much additional money, values, knowledge flew into the region from the European Union over these 20 years? How much we have invested into the environmental infrastructure due to the enlargement of the European Union. And therefore, I'm not a pessimistic concerning the further development. I understand very clearly that professor will advise us concerning the research. I'm confident about the HELCOM dedication for the further development. I'm confident that the people awareness about the problem will grow and grow and grow, and therefore I am much more optimistic. Professor, is it true that yesterday your interview in the one of Estonian newspaper was published? Do you know about that? No, because I was reading yesterday your interview in the Estonian newspaper. It was a pretty large one, actually. And it sounds, for me, too pessimistic. And therefore, I would like to suggest to be much more optimistic concerning the future of the Baltic Sea, not Lake Baltic. And I believe in research, I believe in science, I believe in common sense of the ordinary people, and I believe the policymakers will follow the pressure from all those participants of the game. Thank you so much, but I have so much to say, but
there couldn't be any better final words for this session. So thank you very much for these final comments. And I think I already get red cards here from the first row. So I'm afraid we have to wrap up.
Basically, yes. I don't know if we should allow the last statements to our panelists, but maybe not this time. Yes? Yes? You say yes or no? Because we will not solve it. This is certainly, are you with me, that this is opening. This is not the first discussion, and this is certainly not the last discussion. But okay, if Maxi pursues, then we go. Let's go from this end. Karin, one sentence.
It is a challenge. Yes, okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe it's enough.
It is, yeah, I have to be optimistic, but it's a challenge. Yeah.
Osa.
I would just say that the projects are here for the policymakers, so I think that we should continuously create the arena where the projects and the policymakers could meet.
Jenny.
I'm happy to hear the optimistic view, and I share it, and I think that the strategy that we're working on can contribute to this Save the Sea objective through cooperation.
Yeah. Heléne.
Yeah, just a reflection also, because the hazardous substances is not a solved problem, it's an increasing problem, I think, especially in the inland. But I think the arena and discussions are the most important to develop on understanding the problem and acting on the problem in a final.
Marja-Liisa.
I think that we can solve the problems, but I think that we really have to tap on the creativity of a lot of different people and work together.
Great.
I think it's a matter of sauerkraut, oranges, and lemons together.
Here we go. Anna?
Yeah, I think that we should be open for another side, so policy should be open for science and science for policy, and we should look for compromise between them, because each side focus on their goals. So, thank you.
And Carsten, Jakob, your final statement.
I'd like to share the growing optimism that's sort of spreading throughout the whole hall here, but I also think it's important to remain realistic.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I deeply believe that this is not the last discussion about these issues. We still will have to work a lot how to bridge the research and innovation and development. We continue, we give our promise that we will continue. This time we didn't have a luxury to ask the questions and comments from the audience, but I would like to insist at this point that anybody who has some questions or good suggestions are very welcome to address both the bonus program and the VINNOVA and the Baltic Sea Stars program and the joint secretariat of the CBSS and with the suggestions. Thank you very much this afternoon, and
thank you, Anders.
Thank you, Maxi.